Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. In the earlier sessions, we discussed about the determination of residential status of individuals, particularly where there were three types of possibilities for individuals. Either they can be resident and ordinarily resident, or they can be resident but not ordinarily resident, or even they can be non-resident. So for the individuals, there were three possibilities of residential statuses, and in order to determine that residential status, we need to check two basic conditions and, if required, two additional conditions. What are those two basic conditions? To check for the conditions to see whether that individual is a resident in India or not, we need to check the basic conditions. If any one of these conditions is satisfied, an individual is said to be resident. Those conditions, everybody should remember them well. Condition number one, a person should be staying in India. He should have stayed in India during the previous year for a period of 182 days or more. That is one condition. If that is satisfied, he will be resident. If that is not satisfied, we have to check another condition, that is basic condition number two, whether an individual has stayed in India for a period of 60 days or more during the previous year and 365 days or more during 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. If that basic condition number two is satisfied, then also a person is called as resident. If any one of these basic conditions or both of the basic conditions are satisfied, the residential status or the basic residential status of a person or an individual can be called as resident. Of course, there are some exceptions to this particular computation. Only in case of an Indian citizen who is leaving India for the purpose of employment or as a member of crew of an Indian ship in the previous year, or even a person of Indian origin or Indian citizen who is visiting India during the previous year. In both those cases, second condition is not applicable. Means only basic condition number one has to be tested. Means such persons will be resident in India only if they stayed in India for a period of 182 days or more during the previous year. Then imagine if a person is determined to be a resident. That is not enough, or that cannot be called as the final residential status. If a person is non-resident who has not satisfied even one of the basic conditions, he is a non-resident, that's it. There is no further checking required if any individual is a non-resident. So what is the residential status of that individual? Non-resident. There ends the matter. But, however, if an individual turns out to be a resident, we cannot stop there. We need to check whether he is ordinarily resident or not ordinarily resident. For that, we need to check two of the additional conditions. Here, we can check the conditions for ROR, whether he is ordinarily resident or not. Any individual will be called as a resident and ordinarily resident if he has been resident in India in 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year. 2 at least. 2 or more we can say. Out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year, if such person was already a resident, then additional condition number 1 is satisfied. But that is not enough. Additional conditions, both of them have to be satisfied for anybody to be called as a resident and ordinarily resident. And there is another additional condition also to be checked. If a person has stayed in India for 730 days or more during 7 years immediately preceding the previous year, that is additional condition number 2. And if that is also satisfied, means both additional condition number 1 and 2 are satisfied, then such individual is called as a resident and ordinarily resident. If he did not satisfy any one of these conditions, he will be called as a resident but not ordinarily resident. In other words, if you just reverse the same conditions, if a person has been non-resident in 9 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year, then he can be called as a resident but not ordinarily resident. Or, here it is not and, or if a person has stayed for less than 730 days, in other words 729 days or less during 7 years immediately preceding the previous year, then also such person will be called as a resident but not ordinarily resident. These are all the provisions, core things you have to remember. Exceptional cases also, wherever applicable, you have to remember. But while solving the questions, we have to look at the facts. Whatever the facts are given, according to the facts, according to the provisions applicable on that fact, we need to give the answers. And all of us hopefully would have completed the assignment that was given to you earlier for determination of residential status of individuals. In one way, I can say that is the most crucial aspect of this chapter, but only part of it. The actual crucial part comes out when we discuss the scope of income, which is nothing but tax incidence. That is where the questions in examination will come. However, because we have MCQs also in the examination pattern, definitely MCQ questions can be expected from determination of residential status of any SSC, but more particularly so individual, for the simple reason because individual's residential status determination involves some calculation, at least number of days calculation. A bit of logic is required, conditions, checking, yes or no. This process is definitely helpful in giving some answer to a question, even if it is a descriptive question also. There were cases earlier when 3 to 4 marks questions were asked on determination of residential status only. But at the same time, I would like to just clarify, if at all any of you are thinking, looking at the key that has been provided to you for the questions on the determination of residential status of individuals. Maybe if you are wondering, this is the way I have to answer in the examination, writing down each month and year and all that, table and all that, don't even think about it. That presentation given in the key is not the presentation that you have to do in the examination. That presentation is there as a part of an institute material which the students should read and understand. That is for understanding purposes, learning purposes of the student. So we need to be always distinguishing the things. When you read a book, when you read any problem and solution from any book, any material, any book, that is only for understanding purposes of the student. That does not mean it is the same way this has to be presented in the examination. So input and output need not be the same way. That always has to be kept in mind. What you are reading, what has been given to you as key to the questions is an input for you. Only for the learning process that you do, that helps as an input. Don't think that this is the output I have to generate in the examination. Output in the examination has to be generated exactly according to the number of marks allotted. If the same question is given for 4 marks, then your output has to be different. If the same question is given for 2 marks, which is quite possible, then your output has to be different. If the same question is given as MCQ, there is no output. Output will be either just choosing one of the ABCD, that's it. Nobody expects how did you calculate, what you calculated. Nobody wants to see that. So, how we actually present it in the examination completely depends upon the question. There should not be any hard and fast rules. There should not be any preconceived notions. And as I always say, if any batsman plays a shot with a preconceived thought on what kind of ball will come in the next delivery, then that batsman has more chance of getting out. So, the game should happen according to the ball, not according to what we preconceive before even the ball is delivered. So how to play the ball depends upon the ball. If the 4 marks question is given, then you write down all the working notes. You show the calculation. You write the conditions. Okay, write the condition and then tell that because this condition is satisfied in this case or not satisfied in this case, this is a resultant. Like this, you write explanations if the question is a 4 marks question. If it is a 2 marks question, you just little bit cut short. Write the provision, directly show the calculations and write that conclusion. That's all. So don't need to show the detailed calculations. So you can just show, for example, don't need to, without writing months also, you can just show the calculation like, for example, like 30 plus 31 plus 30 plus 21, like that. You can just show the calculations without writing months and all the details of that. So the way you present it has to definitely change according to the number of marks. You cannot have a standard answering mode or answering style for every question in the same manner. That is the dangerous part, because that will eat up the time. If we start answering small questions with big space and big questions with smaller space, that doesn't help much. So that presentation is another aspect of any paper, more so particularly in taxation also, that plays a very crucial role. So depending upon the question, the answer should be there. So all that why I'm telling this is, don't expect or don't try to give such kind of answers which have been provided to you. Those are not answers. Those are for understanding the way to answer the question. Answer is what you have given. Summary wise, just what are the key calculations, what is the conclusion. In the examination, if more marks are allotted, at the maximum we can add one more little bit meat to the question, like, okay, what is the provision you have applied? Write that provision also. Enough. And most importantly, wherever possible, you can refer to the section numbers that you would have observed in the answers also. The basic conditions are all contained in section 6.1, and the additional conditions are contained in section 6.6. They can be referred according to the conditions in section 6.1. Enough. 6.1 itself gives a good understanding to the valuer that, okay, this person knows section 6.1 and basic conditions and all. But using these words, basic condition, additional condition, because our sir told basic condition, that is the problem. That should not happen. When we say basic condition, additional condition, that is for our understanding. There is nothing called basic condition, nothing called additional condition. Law will not have these headings. Law is not about having side headings. Law will have section numbers. So when you write, you should write them, not the words that we know. That is another point to note as far as presentation in the examination is concerned. But more than that, all these things will come later. If the substance of the question answer itself is wrong, whatever the best presentation we give also will give us 0 marks only. So ultimately, building the ability to understand the question, interpret it, apply the correct provision and give the correct answer is the first priority, top priority. Once we have achieved that priority, yes, definitely doing some makeup to that, how to pack it well, how to give it like a gift wrap to the valuer, that is presentation. That also helps, that is important, that gives us a little bit of impression. However, that is secondary. Without having achieved the first target, the second one is useless. So both of them have to be dealt and learned simultaneously, and that's what we will come to know, and we will do that throughout this learning process of taxation. So the individual's part of determination of residential status, now that it is finished, actually we can move to the scope of income, incidence of tax, which is the real crux of this chapter. But before that, there is a intermediary part of determining the residential status of other types of SSCs also. For example, somebody like HUF, or company, or partnership firm. First, let me once again reiterate, as far as the determination of residential status of other SSCs is concerned, they are relatively less important. Why? Because computations are not involved here. Mostly, it is judgmental. Determination of residential status of individual is objective in nature. There is no judgment involved in that. Nobody can say, I think he is a resident. No need to think about somebody being a resident or not. He is either a resident or non-resident. If he is resident, either he is ROR or RNOR, because everything is based on facts with hard evidence. And what is that evidence? Number of days of stay in India. So some of you might be thinking, how do we know the number of days of stay in India? We will know, sir. Anybody entering into India, going out of India, there is a 100% record. India is a safe and secure country and a very safe border in general. So how many number of days anybody has lived in India is not a secret. It is a available information and it is a fact. It is not some feeling. But now the situation of others is little different. This is little bit judgmental, because there is no computation involved here. Rather, determination is what we have to do. We just need to identify about a particular situation. So fact and situation need not be same. Somebody stayed in India for 182 days, fact. Now what we are talking about, this word itself will tell us. Control and management is not a fact all the times. There is nothing that you can 100% with proof you can say that yes, there is control and management. There is a situation that need not be backed by evidence all the times. So that is why the point once again to note is determination of residential status of individuals is non-litigatory in nature. No litigation involved in that. Absolutely, it is just a objective calculation of what is the status, residential status of any person, particularly individual. There ends the matter. There is no judgment in that. And in other words, to tell you the implications, there cannot be any court cases. Like for example, somebody cannot say, I am not resident. I stayed for 182 days, but I am not resident. How can you say that, sir? Law says once you stayed 182 days, you are resident. Just go to hell. You cannot go to court by arguing against anything about the law. There cannot be any litigation there. So when there is number of days of stay, which is clear, which is evident, there ends the matter. No questions, no doubts, no judgments, no litigation, no argument, no feeling. All these things will not apply. That is what we all use one word. That is quite objective in nature. Whereas all the residential status of other types of SSCs is subjective in nature. It depends upon a situation, but not just on a calculation. That is why one of the reasons why individual's determination is more important in examinations is when we talk about these words like control and management, we cannot see that reality from the examination questions or classrooms. This is where the reality only has to identify whether there is control and management or not. But the law is very vague in these things. So if anybody says that whether control and management is there or not, how do we know, sir? My answer would be, we don't know, sir. If it is there, it is there. It is not there, it is not there. We are not the ones to really identify whether control and management is there. And HUF is only just one part. Compared to the other types of residential status of different SSCs, we will come to know that this is a more subjective judgment of, well, let us say, a SING officer. And if the SSC does not agree with that, these are all subject matters of huge litigation. Huge litigation will be there, and only guidelines are there, only just vague words are used here. You cannot expect everything black and white like we did in the case of individual. In case of individual, there is no gray area. There is no gray area literally. Some of you got doubts. That's fine. You thought there was a gray area, but there is no gray area. There is nothing that what if this, what if that, nothing. If there is a fact, there is a fact, and for that fact, there is a residential status attached to that. Directly anybody can determine. No ifs and buts, no beating around the bush. Nothing will be there in the case of determination of residential status of individuals. But all these things will be there for HUF or company or firm. We cannot determine them just like that. So that is why we will just understand the overall guidelines. We will just understand the provisions, what they will tell about determination of residential status of other types of SSCs starting from HUF. But if you observe, HUF is only one more type of SSC which has three types of residential statuses. Other than HUF and individuals, everybody else will have only two types of residential statuses, that is resident and non-resident. But just like individuals, HUF also will have three types of residential statuses, that is ROR, RNOR and NR. But we cannot directly go to ROR, RNOR. That's what we should do. First we should determine whether a HUF is resident or not. How is it possible, sir? This is what the law said. HUF would be resident if the control and management of its affairs is situated wholly or partly in India. So, of course, India is a crucial word because we are talking about whether somebody is a resident in India or not. So, when we can say HUF is a resident in India, if the control and management, these are the words you have to use, all stories, if at all you write, will not give you any marks. If a question as a theory question or a case-based question comes on this, exact words have to be used. in the examination. Control and management is the word, not anything else according to our convenience. Exactly, control and management only has to be used in the examinations. So control and management of what? Of the state of affairs. Of the affairs, we can say, of anybody who is a HUF, and we are talking about HUF here. HUF will be said to be resident in India if the control and management of its affairs is situated wholly or partly in India. Means what? Wholly in India, anyway, resident. Even if it is situated partly in India, then also it is a resident. If HUF's control and management is in India, simply that becomes a resident. And look at these words. As I told already just now, these are vague words. These are generic words. Control, management. What does it mean? There is no definition by law. We will understand what is that, but just we can have guidelines only, but law only just said, used the word and left it. Control and management. That's all. What is control and management? You fight and decide. If you don't agree that control and management is in India, then you go to court and prove that there is no control and management in India. So these are all litigatory points. So we cannot have anything black and white, facts-based determination like individuals. Don't expect that. That is the nature of these provisions. We can't help it. We are not the ones who created the law. We are not the ones who can change this law. We are only the ones who are reading and understanding this law. We just have to take whatever the law says as it is. Any counter argument is of no use, particularly when we are talking about classrooms. If such counter argument is really valid, that can be valid only in the court of law. That will be particularly in high courts and supreme courts. Of course, as we are speaking, there might be some lawyers who are arguing cases against the government about the residential status of one or the other SSC in India. So these are the litigation things which will happen in the real world. So we cannot really enter into that world. Our world is very simple, small. Some numbers are given, dates are given, calculations are done, residential status we determine. That is a straightforward input, process, output model we run. That is how our learning process also and examination process also mostly will be there. But these are different things. These are the things which will run on the basis of two sides, both sides having valid points. We cannot say one is correct, one is wrong. Both sides arguing their case, then finally one side winning. But not necessarily that side will win forever. That side can go to the next level and can lose also. So this is litigation. The moment it enters into a judicial process, anything can happen. We cannot say correct, wrong. We cannot say black or white. That's why I call them as gray. There are many shades of gray. So we don't have to get into those thoughts of how would we know control and management is there in India or not. Nobody is expecting you to know. Simply, you just are supposed to know the provision, not to know whether the control and management is really in India or not. That should be given in the question. So according to the question, you have to answer. Simple point here, the provision says what that you should know. That is our job of learning the law. So what the law says? HUF will be resident in India if the control and management of its affairs is wholly or partly in India also. Even if it is partly in India, still that HUF is called as a resident. Then naturally when it will be called as a non-resident, opposite of that. Only opposite of wholly or partly will be what? Wholly outside India, naturally. Again the same. Control and management of the affairs is situated wholly outside India. Then we can call that as a non-resident. Once a HUF is non-resident, there is nothing further to check. And once a HUF is resident, we cannot stop there because we need to check whether it is ROR or RNOR. That will come to it later. But basically the determination of residential status of HUF depends upon what? Depends upon this word, ultimately control and management. That is the crucial word in the determination of residential status of HUF. So remember this one very carefully. Control and management is the word. If it is wholly or partly in India, then HUF is resident. If it is wholly outside India, then it is non-resident. Then again, some people are already thinking, sir, how can a Hindu undivided family have control and management wholly outside India? My answer would be once again, that is none of our business, sir. If it is there, it is there. If it is not there, not there. We are not the ones to decide whether it will be there or not there. In the question, if it is there, let it be there. What is our problem? Are we going to decide what all possibilities are there in the world here sitting? No, that is not our power, and we don't have such kind of authority also. We should not imagine or try to imagine all possible situations of the world also. That never happens, because there will be always umpteen number of possibilities and umpteen number of alternatives which can happen in the real world. If we start thinking about them, how is it possible to have it, is never an answer. There is never an answer for that. It is possible. If it is possible, then only we have a provision for it. If that happens, then only the provision will be applicable. Nobody is saying that because the provision is there, there will be some applicability of that. Not necessarily. So, the question of whether it is possible or not never arises. Always. Always what arises? Law is all about what? Income tax law, particularly being a reactive law. It is not a prescriptive law. You need to understand that logic slowly and steadily. While learning this law, we need to understand income tax law generally will not tell people what to do. Is it going to tell people don't stay 182 days or stay 60 days, stay 365 days? It will not tell anything to anybody. It will not tell the people what to do, what not to do. That is a job of other laws. For example, something like Indian Penal Code or something like other acts which are criminal and civil laws, they will tell, boss, you cannot hit somebody, you cannot beat somebody, you cannot scold somebody, no, you should not do this crime, you should not do that crime. These are what the other laws will tell. They are like what? Generally prescriptive in nature. They will tell what to do, what not to do. Income tax law generally will not tell that. Income tax law only tells you do whatever the hell you want to do, but if you do that, what is your position according to the law? That's it. That's what Income Tax Act is more focused about. So that is the nature of the law. So whatever anybody does, if somebody stays within India for less than 182 days, that is his choice. Income tax law will not interfere in that. Okay, if is that so, boss? Okay, boss, then you are a non-resident, it will tell. If he is falling in the exceptional case. Like that, it is not prescriptive. It is not going to tell what to do, what not to do. Rather, it is only telling the reaction of the law once something has already happened. So income tax law will not tell whether control and management of affairs of a HUF should be in India or outside India. How can we have any control on that? What we can have control on that? If it has control and management situated wholly or partly in India, we call you as resident. Okay. If a HUF has, how and all not, we don't know. If a HUF has any control and management of its affairs situated wholly outside India, wholly, then such HUF becomes a non-resident. And the law said, that's all, nothing more. Law was very broad in these definitions. But we cannot live like that, no, because control and management is a very broad word. That is why there is a bit of explanation given to this word control and management, which can be also asked as a theory question. What do you understand by the word control and management when it comes to the determination of residential status of HUF? That can be a short note question, quite possible, though it is not law. It is only understanding of the law. It is only the experience of the application of the law. And could be a lot of cases have happened already, and from the essence of all those cases, this conclusion can be drawn. So don't take the following 4 points which are given here as law, but these are important for understanding the word or interpreting the word control and management. These are explanations, we can say. Explanations also not in the section itself, but this is a, we can say, the learning process explanation in addition to what has been told in the law. Law was very simple. Law was clear about only these two things. It only talked about these things. Just if the control and management of state of affairs or control and management of affairs is situated wholly or partly in India, it is resident. If it is situated wholly outside India, it is non-resident. There ends the matter. That's it. But now we should know what is the meaning of the control and management. What is that? So simply, of course, they're not going to be explained also, or they're not going to be told also with many clear things. But in general, we can understand certain things. See, when we say control and management, we are talking about the central control and management. We are not talking about the day-to-day activities of the business. Day-to-day activities is not an important aspect we are talking here. We are talking about central control and management. So it is not the activities done by servants or employees or agents that are important. That is not control and management. That is actually really operations, we can call. Operations is not what we are talking. Operations is day-to-day business, day-to-day activities. That is not what we are talking. If that is in India also, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that we cannot say control and management is in India. As long as the central control and management is outside India, even though the operations, day-to-day operations are in India, still we can call that a non-resident, because control and management is about the top brass of the organization, in this case which is HUF. So the central control and management matters. What does not matter is day-to-day business by the servants, employees or agents. That is a first point to be noted. Just once again, understanding point, not legal provision. Second point, the business may have been done outside, no doubt, but still control and management may be wholly within India. That is also quite possible. That is also quite possible, because maybe, let us say, the brain behind the business or the head of that particular business activity may be situated in India. Just because the activity of business really is outside India doesn't matter. Still, we can say the control and management is in India. So, whether the activities are happening in India or outside India, we don't care. What matters is where the head of the institution or head of the family, that head of the HUF. Once again, already some people are assuming karta and all. No, nobody said that. Not necessarily karta. Not necessarily karta all the time. That is all depending upon realities. Don't assume things here. So when we say head means not in that sense. Whatever the business is being carried out by HUF, the core control of that, the central control of that, if it is situated in India, then HUF is resident. If it is situated wholly outside India, then the HUF is non-resident. So what does not matter is, once again, the day-to-day activities. So core things, what matter is the place where the core control and management, central control and management is there, or where the head and brain of the adventure is situated. Again, most of them are very difficult to be proven. Only possible if we have more evidence about them in the real world. Just by looking at these words and sentences, we cannot jump to any conclusions. Depending upon the situation only, we have to check whether the control and management of affairs is in India or not. But one point for sure from these 2 points, what we can understand is, control does not mean operations. Management does not mean actual day-to-day activities. Day-to-day activities can happen one place. Really the management can happen, or the direction, the overall head and brain of that organization can be situated at some other place. That is quite possible. So what matters is where that control and management is situated, rather than where the operations are going on, where the activities of our business are going on. That doesn't matter much. That is what we can learn from first 2 points. And another point is to note here that place of control may be different from the usual place of running the business. So not necessary. So usual place of running the business could be different, and wherever the control and management is situated could be completely different. Exactly same what we are also talking. Sometimes it could be even different from the registered office of the SSC, because registered office may be situated at any place. But is it necessary that the business has to be also run from the registered office of the SSC? There is no rule like that. So once again, another point to be noted, registered office is situated in India. Do we care about that? No. No, that doesn't matter. What matters once again is control and management. We are talking about the place of control here we are talking. We are not talking about the place of running. So if you observe these 2 words, once again, what is more important? Is it the place of control or is it the place of running the business? What matters is place of control matters. What doesn't matter is place of running. Place of running the business doesn't matter. Place of control matters. Why all this? This is all because of the provision in the income tax law related to the determination of residential status of HUF. So if the determination of residential status of HUF has to be done, then only we'll apply all these points. Otherwise, we don't care about control management, wholly in India, partly in India, wholly outside India. All these things will not matter. If we want to determine the residential status of HUF, definitely which will be required for every previous year, every SSC should know what is their residential status. For that purpose, there has to be a checking happening, checking whether the control and management, whether wholly or partly, is situated in India or not. So while determining so, all the things are mostly telling the same thing. Operational things do not matter, control matters, central control matters. And same way, what is the place which matters? Where the head and brain of the adventure is situated, that matters. Same thing just expressed in a different way. Will place of running matter or place of control matter? Once again, place of control matters, the place of running does not matter. And not only that, the registered office of the business also does not matter. Registered office, where is it situated? Doesn't matter. That location is also irrelevant. So place of running is irrelevant. Registered office is irrelevant. Once again, what is relevant is only the place of control. That only is relevant. That's what happens. That's what has to be checked in determining the residential status of a HUF. However, what is this control and management generally? Once again, same thing. You explain it in a different way, use 100 different words. Ultimately, what you're talking is same. Ultimately, that's what you're talking. So, what do you mean by control and management? It means functioning of the controlling and directing power. So, one more point here, just one more word used. Control and management also is a vague word. Same way, you add one more word, what happens? Nothing happens. Ultimately, it is adding to the same concept of, once again, differentiating between operations, the day-to-day activities, and the central control and management. So what is control and management when we say that should have a directing power, controlling power with some degree of permanence. Not that 100% permanent, some degree of permanence. So in general, once again, not necessarily always, in general, who will have this kind of control and management in general, little bit of permanently is going to be only the owners, not definitely the employees. So these are the general areas understanding of control and management. Once again, all of them are still directing towards the same thing. Using different words, but all the 4 points are telling is still the same thing. What matters is not day-to-day operations, Baba. What matters is central control. That is the first point what it was talking about. That is central control. And second point, day-to-day operations, day-to-day business by servants, agents do not matter. And second point is what is a place where we can say the control is situated, where the head and brain of the institution or adventure or whatever you call it, organization, family, that is situated. And what matters is more place of control matters. What does not matter, that is place of running, nor even the registered office of the business matters, because this is all immaterial. What matters is place of control only. Once again, what is a place of control? That is a place where from somebody is exercising their controlling and directing power. And that has a little bit of permanence also. In general, the owners of the business will have control and management, particularly HUF type of organizations will have control and management in the hands of generally the family members only. HUF is not some professionally run organization or something like company. So family members only will have control. Whoever may be having control, if that is there situated in India, then automatically that is a resident. If not, HUF becomes a non-resident. That is about control and management of affairs of HUF. This word is going to be used again, but the meaning of the word is not explained by law. We have to understand the intention of the law with the points which are given here. That's it. That is about basic determination of residential status of HUF. So what we have now, whether a HUF is resident or non-resident. Once again, same logic. If a HUF is a non-resident, what should we do? Nothing. We already know that it's a non-resident, nothing more to do. What if a HUF is a resident? Then we cannot stop, because HUF also has similar situation of ROR and RNOR. So what should be the next step if the HUF is already resident? If the HUF is already resident, now the very important point comes. So far what we are checking, did we talk about Karta? Did we talk about any member of HUF? Nothing. We only talked about some control and management of the affairs. That's what we are talking about. No person was involved so far. No reality is involved so far in terms of fact, number of days of stay. All these things are not there for determining the basic residential status of HUF. However, once a HUF turns out to be a resident, in order to determine whether HUF is ROR or RNOR, that is a variety here, because HUF cannot travel. No, HUF is not some living entity. HUF traveling to Australia, not possible. People will travel. HUF cannot travel. So who is that person? Now we have to focus on. Now Karta comes into picture. So the Karta of the HUF, Karta means the head of that family. Once again, who is that head of the family? How do we know? You don't need to know. Karta means Karta. Who is that family head? That family will tell. We are not here to know who is the Karta of which family. That nobody knows. That will be depending upon reality once again. So what is a Karta? That we should know. Karta means head of the family. Whoever that may be, that has to be given in the question. That so and so person, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, whoever it is, he has to be mentioned that he is the Karta of the HUF. So whoever that person may be, if there is a Karta, there will be a Karta of HUF. That too, particularly when we talk about a resident HUF. Why? Because if HUF is non-resident, we don't care about Karta. Already HUF's residence status is determined. Nothing to check any further. But if a resident HUF is there, we want to know whether HUF is ROR or RNOR, then we have to look at the Karta. Then what we should look at? What we should look at is the same two additional conditions which we already know for ROR. What were those? Earlier what we were checking for an individual. Karta is also a human being, he is also individual. So the Karta, if at all the Karta is resident in at least 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the relevant previous year. If Karta stayed for 730 days or more during 7 years immediately preceding the previous year. Remember these two conditions. What are these two? Basic or additional conditions? Both of them are additional conditions for checking the ROR status of an individual. If both of the conditions are satisfied, then both is important. Both of the conditions are satisfied. Then normally an individual is called as ROR. Now understand the different here. Who will be called as ROR here? HUF will be called as ROR. That is a variety. We are checking the conditions of whom? Not HUF, sir. HUF cannot travel. We are checking the conditions of Karta. Which conditions? Additional conditions. So if the Karta of the HUF has stayed for 730 days or more during 7 years immediately preceding the previous year, and he has been a resident in at least 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year, then if these two are satisfied, who is going to be the resident and ordinarily resident? Who is going to be that? HUF is going to be resident and ordinarily resident, not Karta. Very important point to note. Now just imagine if a question gives a situation where the Karta has satisfied both the conditions and asks what is the residential status of Karta. Can we say he is ROR only by knowing these two conditions? Not possible. Why? First of all, he should be resident, no? Then only resident or ordinarily resident, resident and not ordinarily resident, that thing will come. So we without knowing any other details of Karta, imagine Karta stayed during the previous year only for 10 days in India. Straight away Karta is non-resident. In spite of that, he would have stayed for more than 730 days in the 7 years immediately preceding the previous year, In spite of that, he would have been resident in at least 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year. Both are possible to be satisfied. During the previous year, Karta may be non-resident, no problem. Still, HF can be ROR. Why? Because HF was already resident based on the control and management, and now because of the not residential status of Karta, because of the Karta satisfying the both of additional conditions, HF becomes resident and ordinarily resident. So the question in the examinations which was asked earlier was this. Simple, straightforward question. The residential status of HUF depends upon the residential status of Karta. Do you agree? Explain. That's it. Do you agree or disagree? Residential status of HUF depends upon the residential status of Karta. Agree or disagree? Absolutely disagree. No. Residential status of HUF does not depend upon the residential status of Karta. Please understand that. It depends on what? It depends upon control and management of its affairs. It does not depend upon the residential status of Karta. Basically, the residential status of HUF always depends upon control and management of the affairs. But the final residential status of HUF also does not depend upon the residential status of Karta. It only depends upon whether Karta satisfies these two conditions or not. By knowing whether Karta satisfies these two conditions or not, nobody can determine the residential status of Karta also. By just knowing that Karta has satisfied these two conditions, can you determine the residential status of Karta? Not possible. For that, you should also know how many days the Karta has stayed during the previous year. That has no relevance in the determination of residential status of HUF. Doesn't matter if the Karta is a non-resident also. Doesn't matter if Karta is ROR also or RNOR also. That doesn't matter. It only matters is here. Imagine Karta is ROR, resident and ordinarily resident. So definitely that means what? He would have satisfied these two conditions, right? For sure he has satisfied. Then only he is ROR, no? So these two conditions are satisfied. So can we say HUF is ROR also? No. Maybe HUF's control and management is not in India. If control and management of HUF is not in India, even if Karta is ROR, HUF cannot be ROR because first of all it is not resident, it is non-resident. So how can Karta's residential status be determining the residential status of HUF? Not possible. Same way, imagine Karta did not satisfy these conditions. He could be RNOR, quite possible. Anybody has three possibilities only. Karta is ROR. Is it possible that HUF is non-resident? Absolutely yes. When? If the control and management of its affairs is situated wholly outside India. Karta could be still ROR. Still HUF could be non-resident. No link between residential status of Karta and residential status of HUF. First point. Second, Karta is RNOR. RNOR. That does it mean HUF also should be RNOR? Again no. Not necessarily. Again same. Control and management of its affairs could be outside India. If that is the case, then HUF is non-resident. Karta could be RNOR. HUF could be non-resident. Quite possible. Then other side. Let us say Karta himself is non-resident. Can HUF be resident? Yes, still quite possible. Why? Because HUF may have control and management of its affairs in India. Karta might be not non-resident just because he stayed for less than 60 days also during the previous year. That's fine. That is quite easy to become a non-resident. Just stay for less than 60 days during the previous year. You are automatically a non-resident as an individual. So, Karta might be non-resident, but still HUF could be resident and ordinarily resident also. Resident but not ordinarily resident also. Both are quite possible. We cannot deny that opportunity. So, in all possibilities, what we can say, the residential status of Karta has nothing to do with residential status of HUF. So, the statement given is wrong. Residential status of HUF depends upon control and management of its affairs. Of course, after the control and management of its affairs is found out to be wholly or partly situated in India, after it is found out that the HUF is already resident in India, then also the residential status of Karta does not matter. Only what matters whether the Karta satisfies both of the additional conditions or not. That only matters. If he satisfies both of the additional conditions, then who becomes ROR? Who becomes ROR? Not Karta, sir. HUF becomes ROR. That is a point to be noted. who is satisfying the conditions is Karta. Who is becoming ROR or RNOR here is HUF. So that is why you have to be very careful in identifying the residential status of HUF. Very important question theoretically. Why important? Just because it has a little bit of twist. Why? What is the twist? There is a character, Karta, whose facts are important about these two things, but at the same time his residential status has no bearing on residential status of HUF. That is a variety. That is why Karta's residential status will not be having any impact on the residential status of HUF. However, Karta's position in relation to these two conditions, whether he stayed in India for a period of 730 days or more in the 7 years or not, whether he stayed or he became resident in at least 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year or not, that matters, but not whether Karta is resident or ROR, RNOR, NR. Anything is possible for Karta to be, but still anything is possible for HUF to be also. Okay. Now, once we know the Karta's satisfaction of these conditions, that will determine whether HUF is ROR or RNOR. If Karta satisfies both the conditions, HUF will be ROR. If Karta satisfies none of these conditions, if one of these conditions also is not satisfied, then who will become RNOR? Once again, HUF will become RNOR according to the satisfaction or non-satisfaction of additional conditions by Karta. Once again, I am repeating, here our interest is in determination of residential status of HUF, not Karta. Karta has no bearing on the determination of residential status of HUF. Because there are additional conditions to be checked, we brought Karta into the character, into the story. Otherwise, once these two conditions are checked, Karta has nothing to do with residential status of HUF. That separation is required. If we bring in Karta too much into the determination of residential status of HUF, that becomes a problem. We should not do that. Majorly, it all depends upon this. That is what? Control and management is the key thing which will determine the residential status of HUF. And then, of course, the conditions satisfied by Karta or not will tell us whether HUF is ROR or HUF is RNOR. That's it. That's how the determination of residential status of HUF should be done. Now let us just quickly go through the illustration and understand the application of these provisions. Read the question carefully. The business of a HUF is transacted from Australia and all the policy decisions are taken there. There means Australia. Transacted from Australia also, policy decisions also taken there means Australia only. Then Mr. E, who is the Karta of the HUF, was born in Kolkata, visits India during the previous year 2019-20 after 15 years. The information is given about Karta. He comes to India on 1/4/2019 and leaves for Australia on 1/12/2019. Determine the residential status of Mr. E also and HUF also for the assessment year 2021. These two are different persons. First we should understand Mr. E is a different person, HUF is a different person. Both are not same. Both are related but both are not same. Mr. E's residential status could be anything and HUF's residential status could be completely anything. There is no link between them directly, though the Kartas coming in, going out will have bearing on the residential status of HUF otherwise. Now let us just understand from the first line itself what is the residential status of HUF. The HUF is being operated from Australia. All policy decisions are also taken there. That's enough, no? What can we say? Control and management of the affairs of HUF are situated wholly outside India. Enough. So what is the residential status of HUF? Straight away we can say it is non-resident. Once HUF is non-resident, we don't care about Karta and all. Karta's position will not have any impact on HUF's residential status also, because you don't need to check whether HUF is a resident and ordinarily resident or it is resident but not ordinarily resident. Since that requirement is not there, Karta's calculations do not impact HUF. So finally, conclusion for residential status of HUF is simply that is non-resident. So in this case, what? HUF is non-resident directly. Now, what about Karta? Look at the number of days that he stayed in India during the previous year. And also look at that. He was born in Calcutta but visits India during the previous year 1920 after 15 years. So 15 years he never came to India. So now only he is coming to India. So basically he is an Indian citizen or not, because he is born in Calcutta. Of course he is Indian citizen, that is clear. And he came to India during 2019-20 after 15 years. And how many days he stayed in India? Let us look at this situation. He stayed in India for how many days here total? Calculate that carefully first. From April to almost December. So calculate that. April 30, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, only one day, that is 1st December. So total is what? 245 days he stayed in India. So definitely he is resident for sure. Yes, he is a resident. However, once he is a resident, we have to check the additional conditions for determining whether he is ROR or RNOR. For that, he should be a resident in at least 2 out of 10 years immediately preceding the previous year. Was he? No, because he didn't come to India at all in the past 15 years. So there is no way that he can be a resident in 2 out of 10 years. Not possible. Second, did he stay in India for 730 days or more during 7 years immediately preceding the previous year? No. Again the same thing, because he visited India after 15 years. So both the additional conditions are not satisfied. So naturally, what is the residential status of this Karta, that is Mr. E? Resident but not ordinarily resident. And what is the residential status of HUF? Naturally, that is non-resident. Why is that? Because control and management is situated wholly outside India. I have to write that word clearly with a reason. So 2 points are there. 2 marks. A 4 marks question can be asked here, but you should refer to the provision. You have to write the provisions clearly related to individual also and HUF also. If you write control and management of the affairs of the HUF is situated wholly outside India, and because of that HUF is considered to be a non-resident for the assessment year 2020-21. Enough. That's what you should write. In relation to the Karta, individual he is, so you have to calculate number of days of stay, and first basic condition number 1 is satisfied, 182 days or more, hence he is resident. Once that is satisfied, you have to check additional conditions. Did he stay in India for 730 days or more during 7 years preceding the previous year? No. Was he resident in 2 out of 10 years preceding the previous year? No. Since both additional conditions are not satisfied, the residential status of this person, Mr. E, who is incidentally the Karta of the HUF, is resident but not ordinarily resident. So once again I am repeating, while determining the residential status of Mr. E, you don't care about whether he is Karta of this HUF or Prime Minister of another country or something else. Doesn't matter. He is Mr. E. He is an individual. What is the residential status has to be determined according to the provisions that we already know. We don't care about who is he. But while determining the residential status of HUF, we will care about the residential status of Karta. In fact, not the residential status, but the second 2 additional conditions of Karta will be relevant. But in this particular case, since the entire control and management of the affairs of this business is outside India, HUF is already non-resident. When it is already non-resident, there is no need to check the additional conditions. So that is why the additional conditions of Karta is completely irrelevant in this question. Now another point comes. Same question, let us just extend it. What if the control and management of the business of HUF is situated in India in the same case? Would your answer be different? Same question can be continued like this. Would your answer be different if the control and management or business is done from India or even partly India, partly from India or partly from Australia? Then what? Then the basic residential status of HUF would be that of resident. Then we have to check about E. Once again, same 2 additional conditions we have to check. What are those? Whether he stayed in India for 730 days or more? No. Was he resident in 2 out of 10 years in the previous 10 years? No. So both not satisfied. So what will be the residential status of HUF in that case? It would be also resident but not ordinarily resident. If that is also an additional question that is asked in this. But normally, as far as answer for this question is concerned, residential status of HUF is that of non-resident. Residential status of Mr. E is that of RNOR. That is the answer. And HUF is important also, like individuals, because at least there will be a calculation involved. If not for basic conditions, at least for additional conditions, there may be a bit of calculation. There are no basic conditions for HUF. Basic condition is simply control and management of its affairs. That's it. And coming to the residential status of anything else, actually speaking, anything means firms, AOP, all others, BOI, artificial juridical person, any other type of SSC, simply they will be resident if the control and management is situated wholly or partly in India. Same thing, nothing different. They will be non-resident, that's all. Only when, if the control and management of this affairs is situated wholly outside India. Here are we having anything like ROR, RNOR, something like that? No. Here for AOPs or firms, the residential status is only possibilities are two. Either resident or non-resident. When resident? Only when the control and management of affairs is situated wholly or partly in India. When non-resident? If it is situated wholly outside India, there ends the matter. So there is no further provisions or further checking that we should do. It's very simple and straightforward to determine the residential status of firms and AOP. That is why we will not have any questions from that naturally, because there is nothing for us to do here. Individuals, there is for us to do some calculations. HUF, also there is for us to do some calculation, at least in relation to additional conditions. For AOP and firms, there is no calculation. Only have to check the fact whether control and management of affairs is situated in India or outside India. If it is situated even partly in India also, it becomes a resident. If it is situated wholly outside, then it becomes a non-resident. That is about residential status of firms and AOPs. Now moving on to another important aspect of residential status of companies. Important in reality, to some extent important in exams also as a theory question, but once again we cannot determine or compute the residential status of companies, not possible. Why? Because once again the word used here is very generic word and vague word, and let me just give you a hint. There will be thousands of crores of rupees worth litigation happening in the courts as we are talking about whether a company is resident or not. So it is a litigation matter, purely litigation. Lot of cases will be there to identify whether some company is resident or non-resident. Of course, there will not be any litigation if that company is an Indian company. There is no second thought, no need to go for any kind of judgment. So the problem is not with the first point. When can we say a company is resident in India? Of course, when it is an Indian company. Done. There is no litigation. That is clear. Naturally, Indian company will be resident only. Any company which is registered in India according to the Companies Act of 2013, or for that matter any other act for the time being in force, even prior to independence also, even prior to 2013 also, prior to 1976 also, any company law, whichever the law name it might be, any company registered in that according to that law is also automatically an Indian company. So all of them are automatically residents in India. There is no problem at all with the residential status of companies as long as it is an Indian company. But the problem comes with what? The company which is not an Indian company. If it is not an Indian company, what matters here? Now they have introduced another word. Earlier they used the word control and management. What is that? Is a litigation matter, debatable. But same way, another word they have used here, that is called place of effective management. Very popularly, this is called poem. Not the poetry poem, but that is a popular word used for it. Poem they call it. So when we say poem, we are not talking about Shakespeare poems and all. We are talking about place of effective management of what? A company. If that place of effective management is in India, then such company will be called as a resident in India. Now the question comes, once again, theory question. Residential status of a company depends upon its place of effective management, true or false? Answer is false. No, sir. Residential status of any company will not depend upon place of effective management. So residential status of a company directly will not depend upon place of effective management. It depends upon what? First of all, whether it is an Indian company or not. If it is an Indian company, automatically it is a resident. There will you check place of effective management and all? No need. So the second point is irrelevant for the first point. If the first point is already there, any company which is an Indian company, we don't need to check place of effective management. If a company is not an Indian company, then also a company could be still called as a resident if the place of effective management is situated in India. That is what we have to be very clear about. Then what is place of effective management? Explanation. We don't know whether the explanation will clarify it or complicate it, but still the law says like this. What is place of effective management? Place of effective management means a place where the key management and commercial decisions that are necessary for the conduct of the business of an entity as a whole are in substance made. This is an explanation given in the law itself. What is place of effective management? Again, one word replaced with 3-4 words. That is not called an explanation, but still that's how the law works, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. Earlier they used the word control and management, and they never said what is the difference between control and management and place of effective management. All might be same, not be same also. We don't know what is their intention. So when asked, they said, okay boss, you are all having problem with understanding what is place of effective management, let us explain. So they explained like this fantastically, where they are telling that key management and commercial decisions. So nobody will tell us what is key, which are key and which are not key. That nobody will tell us, but they just said key decisions. Key, what type of decisions that too important? Key means not that lock and key. We are talking important management decisions and commercial decisions, once again, that are necessary for the conduct of the business. And which are necessary, which are not necessary, who will decide? Gray area. As a whole, what is as a whole? We don't know. In substance, once again, they don't want to take chances. So form may be different, substance may be different. So what they want to look at is substance. In reality, actually, on the ground, all these words, how many ever you use, but that has to be proven. So in substance, in reality, as a whole, if the key management and commercial decisions which are necessary for the conduct of a business are taken in India, if that happens and that company is not an Indian company, then also that company can still become a resident in India. If that company is already an Indian company, we don't care about all these things because already it is a resident. There is no need to determine the residential status of an Indian company. It is already a resident. That is straight away. There is no need to create any new line there. So once an Indian company is there, automatically it is a resident. There is no other second thought. But here, if it is not an Indian company, then a problem comes. Then we have to say, check whether POEM is in India or not. Every time I am not going to use the word place of effective management. In short, I am going to call it POEM. But in exam, if it is given, you have to write the abbreviation to that. So same thing, simply it is all mentioned here, determination of residential status of a company. First of all, is it an Indian company? Straight away, it is a resident. No further checking, all these things not required. Directly here it comes. So if it is an Indian company, yes, it is a resident. That done. No, it is not an Indian company. Then what we'll do? Then we'll check whether the POEM of the company, POEM means the place of effective management of the company, is situated in India in the relevant previous year. Yes, then also it is a resident. No, then it is a non-resident. That's all. That is how the residential status of company will be determined and how all these things will be actually applied. Lot of litigation points. Most of them will be discussed at the final level. We don't need to really go into the details of those things now. At a general level, all that we need to know is, yes, residential status of companies will have to be determined like this. Whether the company is an Indian company or not. Yes, then the company is resident. No. Okay, fine. Second step. Whether the POEM of the company is in India. Yes, then the company is resident. If no, then non-resident. There ends the matter. Only these are the possibilities of residential status of a company. In case of a partnership, firm or association of persons or LLP, in all those cases, wherever there is a other than individual HUF company, all those places we can just say the control and management of its affairs wherever it is situated. If it is situated either wholly or partly in India, then it is a resident. If it is situated wholly outside India, then the same becomes a non-resident. That's it. That is the residential status of HUF and firm, AOP and a company. Once again, we have one more thing. Just have to no need to worry about this local authorities and artificial juridical persons. Same. Actually, this 1.5 and 1.3 are one and the same. There is nothing new here. What is the same thing here? It would be resident if the what? If control and management is situated either wholly or partly in India. Non-resident when? Control and management is situated wholly outside India. That's it. So there is no difference between firm, AOP, local authorities and artificial juridical person. All of them having same type of determination mechanism of residential status. And if you go back to the definition of persons in the first chapter, these are the only persons, no? Overall persons, individual, HUF, firm, LLP. Firm, LLP both are same in the eyes of income tax law. Then we have company, local authorities, artificial juridical persons. So AOP, BOI more or less same. So for everybody like this, we have one kind of calculation of residential status determination. Individuals, we have a separate type of mechanism. HUF, we have a separate type of mechanism. All others like firm, AOP, BOI, local authority and artificial juridical person, all of them have one thing only. One and only important keyword there is control and management. That's all. This is the only thing that is going to determine the residential status of all other type of SSCs. Control and management. This is going to be the completely the important word. But when it comes to the companies, of course, poem is not going to be important. First of all, it is going to be important whether that company is a resident, whether the company is an Indian company or not. If yes, no need of poem and all. If not, then yes, then you have to check what is the poem of that company. If that poem is in India, that is place of effective management is in India, then we have the residential status of the company determined as resident. If poem is outside India, then that company becomes a non-resident. What is poem? General definition is enough. Don't need to go into the details of them. A lot of litigation is there. But generally what the law has mentioned, where the key management and commercial decisions in relation to the conduct of the business of an entity as a whole in substance are made, whichever place that place is called as the place of effective management. That will tell the residential status of a company which is not an Indian company. For them, that becomes important. That's it. This is the determination of residential status of different other types of SSCs in addition to individuals. With that, the first portion of this chapter, that is residential status, is finished. The second portion of the chapter, that is called scope of total income, that we'll discuss in the next class. But right now, till now, whatever the provisions are mentioned and understood, everybody has to be very thorough with them and should be very comfortable in determining the residential status of any type of SSC depending upon the facts given in the question. Facts are to be understood very carefully, observed very carefully, then refer to the provision, apply that provision. Individuals, the bit of calculations will be involved. HUF also, little bit of calculations might be involved. But all other types of SSCs, no calculations. It is only about identifying the words. If control and management is in India or not. If place of effective management is in India or not. Like that we have to check. What is the substance of the question? According to the situations given in the question, what do we think? What is our judgment? Whether the affairs are being carried on in India or not. How does it look like? That has to be on a case-to-case basis decided. There is no general thumb rule or procedure that we can have to determine the residential status of other types of SSCs. That is possible only for individuals. Clear? So with that, we can conclude the residential status part of this chapter. In the next class, we will continue with how this residential status will be important to determine the tax incidence. In other words, how any income will be taxable or not taxable in the hands of different types of SSCs having different residential statuses. So everybody's income in the world we cannot tax, that we know. What is our scope of total income? And that depends upon residential status and how these two are related to each other. That's what we are going to definitely look at in the coming classes. In the next session onwards, we'll focus on scope of total income. And till that time, take care. Bye bye. Thank you.